Hearing will come to order. Good morning, and I welcome you to today's hearing entitled Cybersecurity R&D. Welcome to the Research and Science Education Subcommittee hearing on cybersecurity, research, and development. Information technology is an integral part of our daily lives. Computers, cell phones, and the internet have greatly increased our productivity and connectivity. Unfortunately, this connectivity and the dependence on our critical infrastructures on information technologies have increased our vulnerabilities to cyber attacks. For example, last year the Pentagon reported more than 360 million attempts to break into its networks. And just 2 weeks ago, a cyber attacker accessed the design plans for the $300 billion Joint Strike Fighter project. But it's not just the Pentagon that needs to worry about cybersecurity. Cybercrime is a problem for businesses, large and small, and for every single American. The FTC estimates that identity theft costs consumers about $50 billion annually, and even more alarmingly, it's the fastest growing type of fraud in the United States. These aren't just individual crimes or individual criminals. Increasingly, globalization and the internet mean that sophisticated organized crime groups can mine information, selling it both nationally and internationally. In 2007, nearly 50 million credit card records were taken when cyber criminals broke into computer systems used by the retailer TJ Maxx. Some analysts put the total cost of the breach at over $4 billion, and the stolen card data was used to defraud retailers nationwide. As a result of this, Walmart lost almost $8 million to fraudulent gift cards. Ultimately, 11 people were indicted, including 3 U.S. citizens, 2 individuals from China, 1 from Belarus, 1 from the Ukraine, and 1 from Estonia. This is what cyber attacks are about. It's a worldwide challenge to law enforcement, and it can affect any American. Improving the security of cyberspace is of the utmost importance. It will take the collective effort of the federal government, the private sector, our scientists and engineers, and every American to be able to accomplish this. In order to realize the full benefits of information technology, we need advances in cybersecurity R&D. Cyber threats are constantly evolving, and cybersecurity R&D must evolve in concert through a combination of near-term fixes and long-term projects that build a more secure foundation. People are perhaps the most important part of our IT infrastructure, and according to experts, they're also the weakest link in many systems. Better cybersecurity education for both the general public and for current and future IT professionals is vital. However, there's still a lot we don't know about how humans interact with technology. Therefore, more research into the social and behavioral sciences has the potential to significantly improve the security of our IT systems. Today, we'll hear from witnesses who are actively engaged in efforts to improve the security of our digital infrastructure. I look forward to witnesses providing valuable insight into the challenges we face in tackling this complex issue and the role of cybersecurity R&D in education in any comprehensive solution. The Science and Technology Committee has a key role to play in improving cybersecurity, and to that extent, we are holding a series of hearings to examine various aspects of this issue. After we focus on R&D in education, next week our subcommittee will hold a joint hearing with the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee to hear how federal agencies are responding to the administration's 60-day cyberspace policy review. And later this month, the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee will hold a hearing to assess the efforts of DHS and NIST. There's no doubt that our use of the internet and other communication networks is continuing to grow and evolve, and that threats from individual hackers, criminal syndicates, and even other governments are growing and evolving too. I'm glad that the President is taking an active role, and there's no doubt in my mind that administration leadership will help better define and prioritize cyber threats, coordinate the federal response, and develop effective partnerships with the private sector. As chairman of the subcommittee, I look forward to working with my colleagues and the administration to ensure the development of a strong cybersecurity strategy. I want to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to appear before the subcommittee this morning, and I look forward to your testimony. Now the chair will recognize Dr. Ehlers for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Almost a decade ago, I was serving as a rapporteur for the NATO Parliamentary Assembly Committee on Science and was charged with the responsibility for writing a position paper on cybersecurity. That was a real eye-opener to me. I had never investigated and obviously had to do a great deal of work to prepare the paper. We were, of course, dealing with more than just the commercial cybersecurity concerns, which are largely the concern today. We were dealing not only with people trying to find out what was on the federal cybernet, but also how people could do damage to our entire cyber superstructure in the United States through various nefarious schemes. That was a real eye-opener to me, and today continues my education on this program. Cybersecurity is of great concern to both the federal government and private industry, and that's quite a change from a decade ago when it was considered entirely the concern of the federal government. But this is an especially timely hearing, since a little over a month ago the House passed the measure reauthorizing the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Act of 2009, better known as NITR-D. As you know, the NITR-D program is responsible for the coordination of all the unclassified federal research and development efforts in federal security. However, cybersecurity efforts are only a small part of the overall NITR-D mission, and I'm glad that this hearing will focus special attention on this subject. As we become more dependent on virtual information and services, security becomes more and more challenging to maintain. Fostering trust between the public and private sector will allow for the type of research partnerships necessary to keep our information secure, and exchanging information between stakeholders is critical. I am also particularly interested in learning how we are supporting the education and training of students in this rapidly changing field and whether the current mechanisms are adequate to ensure our national cybersecurity interests. I look forward to learning from our witnesses today about their experiences in cybersecurity research, development, and education, and how we can strengthen our federal efforts in this area. I certainly thank you for attendance, and I'm hoping to learn much more than I learned a decade ago when I first got involved in this field. Thank you very much for being here. I look forward to your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers, and I always learn a great deal from you. It's great to always great to have you here, and you always have better stories to tell. So it's
just remember their stories.
Okay, if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. First, Dr. Seymour Goodman is a professor of international affairs and computing and co-director of the Georgia Tech Information Security Center at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Ms. Liesyl Franz is the vice president, Information Security and Global Public Policy at TechAmerica. Dr. Anita is the director of the Secure Decisions Division at Applied Visions, Inc. Dr. Fred Schneider is the Samuel B. Eckert Professor of Computer Science in the Department of Computer Science at Cornell University. And finally, Mr. Timothy Brown is Vice President and Chief Architect for Security Management at CA Incorporated. Okay. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you have all completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And right now it's about 10:15. We're expecting votes at about 11:15, so we'd appreciate if panelists could stick to that 5 minute time frame, and we'll have a good amount of time then for questions. So we will start here with Dr. Goodman. Dr. Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Ehlers, distinguished members and staff of the subcommittee. In addition to my academic positions at Georgia Tech, I also serve or have recently served as chair of the National Research Council Committee that authored Towards a Safer and More Secure Cyberspace, and as vice chair of the Institute for Information Infrastructure Protection, a research consortium of 27 universities, national labs, and federally funded nonprofits, and as the principal investigator of Georgia Tech's NSF-funded Scholarship for Service program. A large fraction of the American people, its businesses, and government institutions have become increasingly dependent on networked information technologies. We are at risk because these infrastructures are riddled with vulnerabilities that cannot be fully trusted. And there are malicious people, greatly enabled by network connectivity, seeking to exploit those vulnerabilities. Like auto safety or public health, cybersecurity should be viewed as a broad societal issue requiring continued improved responses to dynamically changing circumstances. These responses will require better, larger, and more agile education and research programs, and the effective and broad deployment of the output of those programs in timely ways. Technical progress will be of extreme critical importance, but not in itself sufficient. Policy, economic, and behavioral issues must also be addressed. In particular, market forces have failed to provide the nation with a level of cybersecurity adequate for its needs. An authoritative interdisciplinary study of how this may be changed would be of enormous benefit to the nation. I would like to raise two other specific subjects of both near-term and long-term urgency and importance. The first is what I fear is a coming tsunami of insecurity due to the spread of cellular telephones and other mobile devices. The second concerns educating a professional workforce. The ubiquitous spread of cell phones and other small, increasingly powerful computers with wireless connections is likely to result in unprecedented opportunities for criminals, stalkers, industrial spies, foreign intelligence agencies, and other unfriendly actors. Cell phone users number over 3.5 billion, already a majority of the world's population, and vastly outnumber traditional Internet users. This is leading to increased possibilities for information insecurity, not least because of the huge increase in the number of connected potential malicious actors and potential victims. Attacks employed against other computers will be deployed against the mobile devices, especially as they become primary means of access to the Internet. There are many additional vulnerabilities because of battery limitations, the use of airwaves instead of wires, the ease with which devices and the information on them may be lost or stolen, particular forms of denial of service attacks, and new target applications such as digital wallets. The vulnerability of mobile devices potentially affects almost every American citizen and organization. Its international dimensions are without precedent. Research, development, and deployment efforts to improve security will necessitate a solution to a large number of interdependent technical and business problems and require researchers from multiple disciplines, and will depend on strong forms of involvement with the private sector and international institutions to ensure effective and widespread implementation. A safer and more secure cyberspace will also demand many more professionals in the workforce on the front lines defending organizations and infrastructures. This will require new faculty and curricula at a wide range of educational institutions. I conclude by drawing your attention to one of the few efforts to grow this workforce on a national scale, the NSF Scholarship for Service program. It provides scholarship support to U.S. citizens who must start their careers in the federal government. The results of this modestly funded program, on the order of about $10 million per year, has been impressive. Since 2003, 970 mostly master's-level professionals from 34 universities across the country have been placed in agencies. Many of them would not have chosen to study cybersecurity or work for the federal government without it. The government has done well in establishing this program. It should be continued and carefully augmented to have a more extensive impact. Thank you for inviting me to testify. I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. Chair, I'll recognize Ms. Franz.
Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Ehlers, and distinguished members and staff of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and to provide the technology industry's perspective on cybersecurity research and development and on the cyber workforce. I respectfully submit my written statement for the record. As innovators of technological solutions, as well as critical infrastructure owners and operators, the private sector is a key stakeholder and partner in improving our cybersecurity posture. While there are many things we collectively need to do on a real-time operational basis, we also need to be working on longer-term strategic initiatives that will ensure our cybersecurity posture and leadership for the future. R&D and education for a skilled workforce are precisely those areas that are strategic in nature and require immediate and sustained attention. I will address both in my testimony today. Currently, we expect about 2/10 of the federal government's 2009 budget to go towards cybersecurity R&D. That amounts to about $300 million, which in today's highly networked and highly interdependent environment is deemed by most to be inadequate. We welcome the comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative's R&D efforts under the Cyber Leap Year project to identify the most promising game-changing ideas to reduce vulnerabilities, and we look forward to the results of that process. We also welcome the R&D focus in President Obama's cyberspace policy review. We were very pleased with the report's inclusion of R&D, its acknowledgement of the need for public-private collaboration, and we view this new impetus for a framework as an opportunity to pursue greater cooperation. Companies conduct R&D all the time to develop products and services needed in the marketplace. On the more strategic side, many companies also participate in partnership efforts to assess and mitigate risk to the IT sector, including R&D work under the National Infrastructure Protection Plan partnership framework. However, there is no institutionalized mechanism for providing input into the federal R&D portfolio development. But through increased collaboration, we are enhancing the mutual understanding on R&D efforts between industry and government. Increased coordination is crucial to identify gaps and fill them and avoid unnecessary duplication between the projects that industry might undertake and those that the government might undertake. That's why we recommend a more formal mechanism be put in place for industry's input and, importantly, for public-private collaboration where necessary and feasible, especially in projects that are national in nature and will reset the paradigm. Another interesting concept is a national clearinghouse to serve as an intermediary between government and industry and other stakeholders on dialogue and collaboration for R&D and related projects. I'd like to take my remaining time to focus on the cybersecurity workforce. The adoption of technology has far outpaced our education and training capabilities for developing a pool of skilled IT security professionals, so we are short everywhere. Interestingly, on the way home from work yesterday, I was behind a city bus in D.C., and there was an advertisement for a job fair for IT professionals for DISA and JTF-GNO, the DoD Joint Task Force Global Network Operations. Believe me, that's something I never thought I would see on the back of a bus. But it's one example of active government recruiting efforts in this area. Existing federal cyber-related education and service corps programs like the one that Dr. Goodman mentioned are laudable ones, but they are not without their own challenges. Recruitment and retention are both difficult. We need to continue efforts to improve our university and existing job programs and develop a relevant government career path to help meet and retain the demand. In addition, we cannot rely only on university education to help shore up our personnel resources for the future. We need to adjust our national education curriculum for the K through 12 years to reflect the new environment as well. Kids today are much more computer savvy than we ever dreamt of being, so we need to match and magnify that capability for our future. In sum, we have much to do, but we welcome recent efforts and are optimistic about the opportunity to work together to leverage the momentum and make progress. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and express industry's perspective on this important issue, and I will try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Franz. And Chair, now recognize Dr. D'Amico.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski, Mr. Ehlers, and the subcommittee. I'm the director of Secure Decisions, a division of Applied Visions, which is a small business in New York. We specialize in improving the situational awareness of cyber defenders. We help them understand what's going on in the network, find suspicious activity, and figure out what to do about it. I'd like you to note the name of my division, Secure Decisions. As a psychologist, I wanted the name to reflect the importance of human decisions of security professionals. I've since learned we need to improve the decisions of a lot of people, not just security professionals. We must teach programmers to make secure design decisions that build security into software from the beginning and not just tacked on at the end. Home users need to be educated about the risks of their internet decisions before they click on the interesting ad. Students need to learn the ethics of using computers for entertainment and online socializing. We need to change the culture to make good security second nature to all of us and not something that we try to avoid. But this change in culture is not going to be achieved by a bunch of smart engineers designing new intrusion detection systems. This cultural shift requires the expertise of those who understand how to change minds, that is, the social sciences. So my first takeaway to this committee is that cybersecurity education is not just for security wonks. We need to broaden the base of those we teach and involve the social sciences in the education of this larger audience. My second takeaway is that we have to get better at training the people whose job is computer security. New graduates with information security degrees have little opportunity to learn by doing, as prior generations had to do. Young soldiers, in particular, have little time to become proficient before rotating out to their next assignment. How do we improve this? First, we need to formalize the mentorship of the new generation. Before the old guard retires, they need to share their knowledge with the newbies. But mentorship is not something that comes naturally to everyone, and that's where the social sciences can help. Second, we need better ways for security practitioners to share information with their own peers. New collaboration techniques developed with social scientists can make a difference. Third, we need to train professionals on realistic yet safe training networks where they can practice their skills without bringing down eBay. This is also needed for researchers to test out their new technologies. And speaking of research, few results of federally funded cyber R&D ever make it into the real-world operations. As a taxpayer, I find this disturbing. Little research funding is directed at technology transition. Once the paper is published, many researchers and government program managers feel their job is done. The rest of the work, making the technology affordable and usable, is abandoned in the hope that someone else will pay for it. Furthermore, academicians are judged by their publication history, but few scientific journals consider technology transition worthy of their attention. And finally, computer scientists are often just not into the softer side of security, that is, how people use the technology. Yet studying how people use cybersecurity technology is exactly what is needed to improve technology transition. We need to study the usability of systems and to test them in operational environments where real people get to try them out. So my third takeaway to the committee is that the government should fund projects through the technology transition phase and should use transition to evaluate both researchers and the government program managers. My last message is about how little input the private sector has in the federal research portfolio. With the exception of a few ISACs, the private sector has no voice. Furthermore, the private sector cannot easily tap into the results of the federally funded research. I believe the government should require researchers to publish their results in the trade magazines and the online forums where security professionals communicate, not just in the scientific journals. In closing, please keep in mind what information security experts often say. Cybersecurity is about people, processes, and technology. As educators and researchers, we must look at all three of these things, not just technology. I'm one of the few psychologists actively engaged in cybersecurity R&D. I am surrounded by computer scientists and engineers. But I hope with this committee's support that in the future, my position as a psychologist in cybersecurity will just be a bit less lonely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. D'Amico. Dr. Schneider.
Thank you for inviting me here to testify today. In the few minutes I have, I want to summarize the key points in my written testimony. I start with the observation that computing systems we deploy today are not as trustworthy as they could be, and we don't know how to make them as trustworthy as they need to be. As the U.S. increases our dependence on these systems, they become ever more attractive to attackers. Our defenses don't keep up, so we operate in a reactive mode, and we improve defenses only after they have been penetrated. We thus prepare to fight the last battle rather than the next one. We need to move beyond this reactive stance to a proactive one. In short, we must build systems whose trustworthiness derives from first principles. This proactive approach requires having a science base for cybersecurity. We don't have one, and we need to develop one. Doing that will require making significant investments in research, and the investments will have to be made on a continuing basis. Cybersecurity will never be a solved problem. We're not going to find a magic bullet solution. We've accepted this reality for medical research and for defense. The same reality applies to cybersecurity. The analogy with public health and medical research highlights two disconnects between cybersecurity research today and what is really needed. The first was the lack of science base I just discussed. The second disconnect concerns the policy part of the picture. Technology solutions that ignore policy questions risk irrelevance, as do policy initiatives that ignore the limits and capabilities of technology. This means that we should also be supporting research in policy and research that aims to bridge the gap between technology and policy. Let me make two further observations about cybersecurity research. First, when the work is classified, it cannot engage many of the country's top researchers. It necessarily receives less scrutiny by a diverse community of experts, and it will be slow to impact the civilian infrastructure on which we increasingly depend. Second, cybersecurity research once was funded by a diverse ecology of agencies. This was valuable because different agencies have different needs, goals, cultures, styles, and criteria for reviewing proposals. But that diversity has been eroding. Getting that diversity restored should be a priority, and it would undoubtedly bring better value per research dollar spent. I earlier made the observation that today's systems are not as trustworthy as they could be. There are many reasons for this, and university education certainly has an important role to play in the solution here. With significant increases in research funding, more faculty will be working on system trustworthiness. So more faculty will be available to teach these subjects, and that is crucial. But understand that, like any new discipline, this field is in flux. There is not yet a widespread agreement on the core, so we would be ill-advised to be legislating what gets taught. We would also be ill-advised to be legislating that everyone be taught. Only a fraction of the students that a computer science department teaches end up in systems building jobs. Also, many who are building our nation's critical infrastructures were not computer science majors. What I think we need is a new graduate professional degree program. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, and most other professionals in our society are a good model. We need a post-bachelor's degree for systems trustworthiness professionals. On the university side, this would mean developing courses, texts, and other teaching materials. And outside the university, it would mean creating a force field so people are compelled to invest the time and money to pursue this new degree. In closing, let me say how encouraged I am by all the recent interest and activity at the federal level regarding cybersecurity. But let me caution, long-term activities that will require long-term investments are the only way to get a long-term solution for this problem. We need to be making long-term investments in research, and we need to be making long-term investments in education. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Schneider. And I recognize Mr. Brown.
Good morning, Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Ehlers, and the members of the subcommittee. My name is Timothy Brown. I am the Vice President and Chief Architect for Security Management for CA Incorporated. I will testify today on behalf of CA, and I will draw in several instances upon the positions of the Business Software Alliance, of which CA is an active member. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on cybersecurity and R&D. I commend you for your focus on these issues, which are of great importance to CA and the cybersecurity of the nation. The threats to our security are real and ever-changing. The day of the hobbyist hacker are long past. Today, most threats are posed by organizations for profit groups, which run very much like businesses, except their business plan is to steal data, identities, credit card numbers, and other valuable information, and convert them into profit. My job at CA is to help stop these bad actors. We develop tools that individuals and businesses can use to protect themselves, but the threats are ever-changing. For example, we have an immense and recent growth in social networking sites like Twitter and Facebook. This is a good development, but the cybercriminals look at these developments as simply new business models. So, what can we do about all this? We believe the solution requires a multi-pronged and smart approach consisting of 4 elements. Industry and government need to work together, set comprehensive goals that meet the full range of threats, and develop rapid and effective responses. As a country, we need to invest more in basic research. The science must advance for us to develop the tools we need to address the threat. And we need to make sure that those advances in the laboratory are quickly turned into the products people and companies need to protect themselves and maintain their security. We need more and better educated security specialists. We have made some advances in this area, but our universities must be encouraged to devote more resources to supplying the security professionals of tomorrow. Finally, we must ensure the public is fully aware of the threats they face. Today, too many Internet users fail to take the needed steps to ensure their data and valuable information is safe and secure. One of these elements stands out. We believe the indispensable element of addressing the security threats is ensuring our country continues to invest in basic research into the ever-changing information sharing environment. In my written testimony, I set these points out in great detail. I would now like to highlight a few of the technology changes that will create new opportunities for cyber criminals. First, increased bandwidth and connectivity to laptops and smartphones is very important to our economic recovery and key to our long-term growth. But this trend also poses new challenges to security by pushing our existing security technology to its limits. Second, demand for data storage and computing power are ever increasing. Over the coming years, we expect these demands to increase sharply. More data means more cyber criminals have more opportunity to do harm. Third, as I have mentioned already, the emergence of social networking has happened very fast and is transforming the way the Internet is used both at home and work through increased collaboration and information sharing. But the security systems used by social networks need to get much better very quickly. Fourth, today businesses collaborate and share data. They no longer operate independently, and this is good. For example, hospitals collaborate with other hospitals, universities, healthcare providers, but more collaborations create more vulnerabilities. Finally, the source of risk is also changing. Too often today, the threats come from within an organization rather than from malicious outsiders trying to infiltrate systems. To date, we have not given enough attention to these insider threats. To address these problems, we recommend the following ways federal support for advanced research can help. Developing test tools and products that can identify vulnerabilities, logical inconsistencies, and inappropriate backdoors. Ways to ensure security measures can keep pace with data being used by hundreds, sometimes thousands of people simultaneously. New identity management technology and business models that are acceptable to consumers and industry. Models enabling people to collaborate and interact securely. Research into insider threat detection and advanced data leakage protection. But this is not enough. Colleges and universities have made great progress, and security courses are now mandatory in many programs. However, the security knowledge tends to focus more on secure coding practices and less on implementation and design of secure systems. We need simply more security professionals well-trained in areas such as identity and access management, threat detection and response, and cryptographic systems. Finally, we believe we need to significantly increase our national effort to raise public awareness about cybersecurity. This would decrease the likelihood that consumers will become victimized, as well as decrease the likelihood that the computers will be hijacked to serve as launching pads for larger attacks. We simply need to develop a national cybersecurity, public awareness, and education strategy. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And thank all our witnesses for their testimony. At this point, we're going to begin our first round of questions, which is the real fun point of these. So I'm going to save my questions for the end. So I'm going to recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. It was made mention that we need to constantly update curriculum and make certain that we're creating state-of-the-art education for our cybersecurity professionals. Dr. Schneider, you and I claim New York as our base of operations, and we have a wealth of community colleges. Is there potential to draw in the infrastructure of our community colleges and develop some earlier investment in cybersecurity professionals? And I would throw out into the question, I would make the statement of the unusual glut that seems to be emerging in terms of professionals from outside our borders that are addressing this field, this arena, and we're not growing and cultivating domestically the talent we require.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I completely agree with the premise that we need to employ a broad spectrum educational approach to the problem. We're not going to solve this problem only with PhDs or only with bachelor's graduates. There are jobs that are suitable for somebody educated at the level of a community college, and there's life, which means people educated at the level of K through high school, and actually those of us who have graduated long ago and need to exist for some years to come need to have a much more sophisticated view of what's going on. So I believe there's going to be a broad spectrum of jobs available, some of which we would do best to train people at the community college level for, and I believe the community college will become more and more sophisticated as we get a better understanding of some of the cybersecurity challenges.
Mm-hmm. Are there others on the panel? And by the way, let me thank the panelists. Your information is very helpful. Is there anyone else that would like to respond to that? Dr. D'Amico?
I think you raise a very interesting point about the role of community colleges, and I fully agree with you that there are not enough U.S. citizens who are being trained in this area. I think community colleges can participate in the training of security professionals because, as we've learned, this is not all about academic education. There is a lot of learning by doing, and I think that we should incentivize the private sector to bring the community college students into internships. I sit on the board of directors of the Metro chapter of ISSA, which is the second largest chapter of security professionals in the world, right in New York City. We have people who want to bring in interns from places like community colleges to work with them. So I think this is part of structuring a mentorship program.
Thank you. Dr. Goodman.
Let me return to the Scholarship for Service program for a moment and talk about one of the offshoots of that effort. Having these students, by the way, has enabled quite a number of departments, computer science departments or MIS departments around the country to build their own capacity. And several of them have used that greater capacity to seek roles in trying to develop curriculum and educate students regionally in other institutions, particularly community colleges and law enforcement schools in their areas. mention in particular Mississippi State University and the University of Tulsa. And there is a very strong feeling among most people who are very seriously concerned about developing a workforce and an educated user community that this effort must be extended far more broadly than just the universities in this country. And I would also, again, endorse the idea of programs that specifically are geared to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Franz?
Thank you. I'd only like to add the notion that as we discuss a broad spectrum of the kinds of education and skills that can contribute to resolving the problem, that we don't then funnel all of our students into very rigid, specific requirements for cybersecurity professionals. The multidisciplinary nature, the multifaceted types of education that can contribute to resolving the problem is something that we need to retain. Imagine if those that might be working in the cybersecurity field now did not get a college degree, and yet they are big contributors. If they were shut out of the ability to provide that, that would be a detriment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Taco, for your questions. Chair now recognize Dr. Ehlers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little hard to know where to start. It's been a very rich testimony and very, very helpful. Several of you testified there needs to be better interaction between the government and the private sector with regard to cybersecurity. And by the way, these questions are going to be for everyone because I picked up ideas from all of you. And Ms. Franz, I believe, testified more formal mechanism needs to be put in place for private sector input and collaboration. And so one of the questions I'm asking is, what has your involvement been with NIDR-D or any of the mission agencies to initiate such interactions or discussions? Have you been rebuffed or have you been accepted? And if you've been accepted, how have the conversations gone? Dr. Goodman, you also note in your testimony that market forces have failed to provide the nation with a level of cybersecurity adequate for its needs. And this seems to imply that government regulation or other significant intervention is required to achieve adequate cybersecurity. But it seems to me the government hasn't done that good a job itself in governing its own needs. And so a question is there, can the government really provide the leadership you need, or is it just the money you need, or how can we reach the point that you and I both seem to want to get to? One other aspect, some of you mentioned how it's hard to recruit people for security jobs. And it wasn't clear to me whether it's because these jobs are not particularly appealing. Perhaps computer experts would rather be programming than playing cops and robbers. I don't know. Or maybe you have to appeal to cops and robbers people and provide them with appropriate cybersecurity training. But I'm just wondering if the cybersecurity jobs are just not appealing enough to the people that you're trying to get. So it's a potpourri of questions, but I think you were all sort of focusing in that same area. So Dr. Goodman, if you'd kick it off, and we'll just go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Ehlers. I think a fundamental problem out there that is largely behind the statement that I made is that for a variety of reasons, cybersecurity has frankly not been taken as seriously as it should be in putting all of these systems out there that are simply so vulnerable. Security has not been a major design consideration. It has not been a major driver for the businesses who are out there in cyberspace doing whatever they do in cyberspace. There has been no pressure on them, and when things go wrong, they usually are not the people who suffer the consequences. I'm a believer that, as is the case with lots of other security and safety issues in other infrastructural domains, that some requirement, if you'd like, needs to be made on those who are in the best position to mitigate risk to do so. And that may, in fact, require regulation. May require certain kinds of laws that, for example, heighten liability. It may benefit from coming up with the kind of technology that is so easy to use and so cheap to use and so easily integratable with what we have out there now that you just cannot not use it. Nevertheless, we have a situation where much of cyber defense is pushed on the end users, you and me and all the other citizens and organizations that are out there. This is partly built into the architecture of the Internet and other things. And we are increasingly incapable of defending ourselves against increasingly capable attacks and attackers. So an effort must be made to get those people who are in the best position to mitigate risk to do so. And I think what should be done, and it's been done in other areas, industry and government need to get together, and they need to get together under some perhaps formal forum or other kind of institutional mechanism with the mandate that they come up with greater security in cyberspace. As simple as that. There are, again, most recently, this seems to have produced some results in the electric power industry where there has been great concern about how vulnerable increasingly IT-controlled electric power generation and distribution may be to outside attacks or to other forms of failure. And FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, got together with the industry associations and basically came up with mandated standards for the systems that they use to generate and distribute power. And I fear something like that will have to be necessary, particularly with regard to mobile telephony, but elsewhere as well.
Thank you. Good comments. Ms. Franz?
Thank you for your question on the partnership effort. Most of the interaction that we have had with NIDRD has been through our increasing dialogue with the Interagency Working Group on Cybersecurity and Information Assurance. So we have had more and more discussions in the work of the Information Technology Sector Coordinating Council, or ITSCC, under the NIP framework that I mentioned. And that has been increasingly positive as well. However, I'd like to say that we'd like to see that discussion and dialogue start at the very beginning of a process rather than at the end, you know, where a document may be presented for review and input, but at that point it's almost too late to do so. So the dialogue hasn't started in the beginning, so that you might see overlaps in a time that's too late. You might miss gaps in things that needed to be done and weren't. And you might see areas where innovation might be stifled by the proposals that the government may make. So I would say that in order to avoid all of those landmines, we would want that partnership to start earlier. But our dialogue has been increasingly positive and rich, and we're finding out a lot more about what industry is doing, what government is doing, and where we can coalesce those efforts more productively.
So progress is being made, but you'd like it to be more formalized and proceed more rapidly?
Agreed. I mean, I think that a more formal process a mechanism, as I mentioned, would enable that interaction at the earliest stage and get the expertise of both government and industry and other stakeholders in the room at the table, perhaps with a blank document, as some have mentioned, rather than a fully fledged product.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. D'Amico, what can you add?
Thank you. You've raised some interesting questions. I'd like to address the one about how we increase the number of cybersecurity experts in the United States. The thing that's keeping this from happening is not the money. We know that they're well paid. In industry, the average salary for a security manager is $108,000. In the federal government, it's 98,000, and in the state and local, it's 79,000. So it's not the money. I think it has to do with three things. One is the availability of jobs. The second is the perceived status, and the third is the lack of U.S. citizens. There are not that many jobs available in industry, and I think it's because they don't see the return on investment. The only reason that people are really investing in security is because of the compliance legislation. But from an economic perspective, they don't see the ROI. In the military, there is no real perceived status for being a techie in the military. If you are in the cyber defense force, you are not on the path to advancement. And so you have to move out of that in order to advance in the military. And then with respect to U.S. citizens, more and more of the advanced degrees in information security and computer science are not granted, not as many of them are granted to U.S. citizens as in prior years. And so a lot of bachelor's degrees are given to U.S. citizens. Only, I think, 8% of the degrees are to foreign nationals. But by the time you get to PhD, you're about at 38, 39% are given to foreign nationals. So we need to change that around as well.
Thank you. Dr. Schneider?
If you want somebody to get to do something, there's this basic dichotomy of the carrot versus the stick. The only way industry that plays in cyberspace, not the cybersecurity industry, but companies that benefit by doing business over it, are going to build more secure systems is if they are somehow incentivized to do that. Return on investment is the carrot, legislation is the stick. I'm not an expert on suggesting which way to go, but I will point out that if there were an incentive structure, then two problems would be solved. One, there would be employment of experts, and cybersecurity experts might be technical and they might be policy-oriented. And second, companies would be very anxious to facilitate tech transitions from researchers into companies. You've only to look back at the dot-com era to notice that lots of good ideas were being discovered in research and were very quickly being monetized in the industry community. So there was an incentive structure. It was a carrot in this case, and it moved. It's the lack of incentive structure that, in my opinion, is what's holding things up.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Brown?
It's one of the things when we look at, research gaps and try to resolve some of those between industry and government. We look at these gaps, we identify these gaps. Industry today is focused, primarily on satisfying their customers' needs today. We prioritize those needs, we staff for those needs, we make sure that we are creating products that can meet those needs today. One of the major challenges industry has is how can we prepare for things that are going to happen 5, 6, 7 years from now? How can we set up that infrastructure that's really going to prepare us for that? And there's a challenge there that says those investments are very, very high risk. How many of those investments are going to really be fruitful? And as we looked at the list of the research areas, when we see those, we see that they're identified as areas, but really plans are not put into place to say how we're going to address those areas. Some of those areas are better left to research of government. Some of those areas are better left to research for public and private partnerships. Some of those research areas are better for university research. It's important that we lay out plans to address each one of those areas and stay to those plans.
Okay, thank you very much. Very useful.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers, for your questions, but now you know that you have used up your question time for the next 2 hearings also, so.
That's fine.
But no, that was very interesting and very, very good questions and good answers, very interesting responses there. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Some of the things that I was going to ask about, some of the ways I was going to go, some of the other members have asked the questions along those lines. I want to follow a little bit more. I'm not sure if there's more we can learn or not, but I just want to push a little bit more on one of those questions Dr. Ehlers just asked. It seems like one of the issues that we face with cybersecurity is that everyone thinks that it's not their problem, from individuals to companies, whether they have, companies that are producing software or operating systems, or companies that just have data that is not protected. So yeah, I think that one of the issues, and I also think that although I think there's not enough attention paid to this also, I'm very happy that the administration is paying attention to it, because it's shining a light on this and what's going on. That's not just a political statement. I'm very happy to see that, because I think that's really needed in our country, because a lot of people think cybersecurity, they hear cybersecurity, they don't realize how much impact it's going to have on them. But we'll just take an example. Yesterday, Microsoft issued updates that patched 31 vulnerabilities in Windows and Office programs, including 18 bugs that they marked critical. Just focusing on Microsoft there, yes, I do use a Apple computer, Macintosh operating system, always have, but not just to pick on Microsoft. But how do we better incentivize that? Like I said, you have all kinds of different individuals, types of companies. How do we better incentivize trying to get these, whether we're talking about software programs or you have data, better protected? And any other ideas? We touch a little bit on this, but does anyone have anything to add on that right now? Dr. Schneider?
I think some sunlight would help. I think we don't do a good job of informing the population about the risk or about the consequences. You have a good notion of what the chances of being burglarized if you walk in any part of this city or probably the city you've come from. You don't have any notion of how often successful penetrations are occurring at banks or military installations or any of the attractive targets. There are good reasons why these institutions don't make this information public, yet if you look at the success of the California breach legislation that's now spreading throughout the nation, whereby when private information is disclosed, the institution that leaked it is obligated to inform the potential victims. That's had a very interesting effect and raised the consciousness both of the owners of this data and of people at large. So I see all this talk about raising public consciousness and public campaigns. I think if business were more obligated to be candid about what was happening, we'd all understand and build a better model of the risks. And once people are more concerned about it, I think that's going to drive innovation and deployments.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, in the past few years, you have to remember that the software industry is, ever changing. Our threats are ever changing. The adversaries we're up against are changing as well. So when we look at software vulnerabilities, just 4 or 5 years ago, no one had a plan in place to train their software professionals. Now, I can't think of any large software vendor that doesn't put their coders through at least secure code training. So the level of awareness has raised to a very good extent. Now, we have to deal with a lot of things from the past. So software that was written 5 years ago is still in place. Software slowly moves out of both industry and consumers. And the industry has done better at announcing vulnerabilities, and they should be applauded for announcing vulnerabilities and working in ways to patch those vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. So overall, I think the industry is getting better. Now, can we do more? Absolutely. Should we have more trained people coming into our organizations? Yes. Should we have better, more trained professionals? Absolutely. But things are taking time, but they are getting better. So we have to remember where we were 3 years ago versus today.
Ms. Franz?
Well, I would like to build on a couple of things that my other distinguished panelists have mentioned. First, I think there is still a great need for awareness or sunlight, as Dr. Schneider said, on what the issue is. And particularly, there's only a small community that know what the threats are to them or what the activity is in cyberspace. And so we've often asked for a mechanism that allows more information sharing between the government and industry on just what the problem is and what are the problems we're trying to solve. That certainly needs to be done in as trusted environment as possible, so that goes back to the partnership mechanism. But that information sharing and exchange is important. I'd like to touch upon the incentive piece from a positive side of the equation, more of a carrot and stick, I suppose. Dr. Schneider mentioned the data breach notification laws, and certainly that's something TechAmerica has been actively engaged in, particularly looking at the requirement for notification when there is a breach and providing for a safe harbor for industry and companies or other organizations, government or academic institutions, if they've taken protective steps to protect that data before it could even be breached. To render that data unreadable, unusable, and so there is a presumption of a lack of harm in that kind of instance. And so on the one hand, it incentivizes companies and other organizations to take protective, mitigative steps beforehand, and then makes the data unreadable, unusable if it is accessed. So that's a positive incentive to look at sort of the carrot and stick approach. I also might suggest that we consider ways that the tax structure could benefit efforts in R&D or other investments in cybersecurity efforts.
Thank you. And I'm over time, but I want to throw one other part in here. Dr. D'Amico talked about we need a cultural shift here in so that people understand that what they're doing and the damage that can be caused. And I know, and actually I'll give the credit where it's due. John Vasey, who works for me, sitting behind me, said if I wanted to cause trouble, what I would do would be to take some thumb drives and throw them out in some parking lot with a Trojan horse on there, because almost everyone's going to pick it up, take it in the office, and plug it into their machine, just to even see who this might belong to, or just things as simple as that. How do we change people's habits and just the automatic reactions that they have that can be very dangerous and cause these vulnerabilities? How do we reach out to the general public to do that? Dr. D'Amico?
We need a marketing campaign. And Americans are very good at marketing, and there's a lot of research on how to market effectively to Americans. People want to be good U.S. citizens, and we really need some kind of marketing campaign for individuals and for companies that you too can make a difference, engage in good computer hygiene, so that before they wouldn't touch a dirty object on the ground because of health considerations. They shouldn't touch a potentially dirty thumb drive on the ground because of computer hygiene considerations. And I think it's well within our capability to engage in a public awareness campaign using everything we know about good marketing. I think the second thing, and this is much harder, is that we really need to understand what the impact is of any single failure. So if somebody picks up that thumb drive and sticks it into the computer and they get some kind of infection, what are the cascading effects of that? We really don't know, and this really is a ripe area for research. We don't know enough about the interdependencies within an enterprise and across enterprise to be able to say, you pick up that thumb drive, you put it into your computer, well, guess what? Somebody in a bank account 2 states away from you is going to have some money taken out of their account. We just don't know that, and we need to study that.
Dr. Goodman.
The problem of educating the public or making the public really fear what might happen to them out there is very, very difficult in this domain. We have a situation, I mean, in other domains, usually there is some immediate physical threat that gets public interest and arouses them to protect themselves and to get help from others to protect them. This kind of threat for most users, not only in this country, but especially around the world, it is so remote, it is so abstract. They are connected to these systems. They see all the good stuff that's going on out there. That's why they're spending so many hours at terminals, on their cell phones and what have you. And any kind of threat is out in oblivion someplace, okay? And physically, it may well be out on the other side of the world. They don't see the immediacy. They don't see, and it's very difficult to educate them to this, given so many other things they have to think about. And we have, again, a situation where even when the public has seen immediacy, for example, in the world of automobile safety, those industries that are in the best position to do something about it have had to have a great deal of government push to do something to protect the public. And I don't think the public, I mean, each individual out there can do things to help them, as they do with their homes, with locks on their doors and what have you. That's not going to be enough, and the public doesn't fully appreciate, and I'm not sure what kind of educational program will bring it home, what kinds of risks they have out there.
Thank you. Well, I've gone way over time here, so I'm going to conclude at that and recognize Mr. Nagelbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this hearing. I think the first question, I think in most of your testimony, you indicate that a lot of the infrastructure for cyberspace is in the private sector. And a lot of ideas have kicked around of how to enhance cybersecurity, and one of those is to establish a rigorous regulatory regime to impose on these private companies. And I think the second one is to somehow give those companies some kind of liability protection for maybe mandates that the government would impose on those companies to do certain activities. So those are two ideas. One of them sounds like more big government. You know, what are your thoughts on the current things that are being talked about? And third are there some better ideas that we need to be thinking about? I'll throw that open to whoever wants to jump in.
I'll take a first cut at that. I think that certainly right now we see a lot of proposals for the kinds of things that either regulatory or the regulatory nature or with regard to practice requirements. The problem is, while the bulk of the information technology or cybersecurity or critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector, the issue is it moves so quickly. We see transitions and evolutions in the technology at a very rapid pace, and legislation is not always the best way to address that, at least not in very specific ways. It usually is a blunt hammer for a very specific problem. So if there is a way to identify the problem, and again I would suggest doing that in a collaborative sense, and then finding the best way to approach it either through a standard or a best practice in many of the collaborative bodies that we have, either standards bodies nationally and internationally. Again, it's also a global issue. We don't want to put into place a regime that is restrictive, will be irrelevant in a very short period of time, and then is either conflicting or provides causes extra burden on companies or other organizations that have national and multinational operations. So it requires a really good, robust dialogue on the best way for legislation to address the issue, as well as other mechanisms.
Ms. Franz also brought up the point of standards, and standards are extremely important when we look at when we look at adhering to, as software is developed, adhering to standards will help us have more consistent and more secure infrastructure across the board. So you know, that's also an extremely important component of this. You know, the infrastructure players in the private sector are, you know, they're driven to do the best that they can. You know, you see who is out there and who hasn't survived. And, you know, the bottom line is if they don't do their job, they don't do things securely, they don't do things in high bandwidth methods, then, you know, they won't survive as a company. So there are a lot of incentives for them to, the private sector, to do the right thing here.
I agree with you, and I think that's one of the things that kind of concerns me about, you know, the government stepping in. Sometimes when the government does that, it leaves a false impression that, oh, the government's watching out for me now, and so I don't have to be careful. I can pick up that thumb drive, or, you know, and so I think we ought to, because most companies are very competitive business.
Absolutely.
And, you know, if they encourage you to buy firewalls and virus software because they know that if you have a disruption in your service of something that came over their network, whether they could have, you know, prevented it or not, there's problems to do that. I want to move to another area, and that is with the huge amount of growth in use of PDAs and cell phones and texting, and you know, that's become a huge piece of our world. Dr. Goodman, what you kind of mentioned that in your testimony. What's going on as far as threats to my PDA and to my cell phone, and what do I don't know, there may be virus software and firewalls for PDAs, but you know, I'm not aware of it. So can you kind of update us on that?
There is nothing in this world, I mean world, expanding faster than cellular telephony and mobile devices more generally. And to perhaps restate some of what I said earlier, I think before you came, the devices are becoming increasingly powerful computers. Many are not yet around the world, but the trend is very much there. And as such, they have all of the vulnerabilities, particularly as they become the principal devices for most of the world to connect to the internet, that you have with such things as laptops and desktop computers. So everything that is seen as a vulnerability that can be exploited with desktops and laptops will be coming with those cellular devices. I can guarantee that. Plus, and I rattled off a number of other features that are associated with mobile devices that are uniquely vulnerable to them, okay, such that they use airwaves. Okay? They have very limited battery power. And there is a disinclination on the part of everybody, the providers, the cell phone manufacturers, and what have you, to use up some of that battery power for security kinds of functions. I could go on and on. The list is really very substantial. I believe, and I use the word tsunami in my oral statement, that there is a tsunami of insecurity far greater than what we're seeing now coming with those devices, okay? And it will be worldwide. And to make another point with regard to worldwide, and on a comment that you raised, Mr. Representative, there are limitations. You used the term rigorous regulatory regime, and I advocated more regulation, or at least thinking about regulation. There are limitations to that and everything else that everybody has raised here with regard to educating the American public and what have you. And that is, we are dealing with infrastructure to an extent like no other on this planet that is connected to the rest of the world. And you can regulate U.S. businesses. You can regulate U.S. users. Universities have been dropping. Our universities are not the best protected places on earth, I hate to say. But what sort of leverage does that regulation or law enforcement have on the other 200 countries or semi-sovereign entities where the internet and cellular telephony all come to ground. And some real thought has to be given to that, and I'm afraid close to no thought has been given to that, except from a law enforcement standpoint around the world. And I'll also say that as a crime and punishment approach, you know, people who are doing things out there are almost safe from being caught and prosecuted. Real attention needs to be given to prevention and recovery. And the world as a whole, much more, even worse than the United States, is giving very, very little thought to that.
Just as a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're going to have to, if we have time when we come back, we have a couple more members that have questions to get in here. So Chair will now recognize Mr. Carnahan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the panel. I had a few questions I wanted to jump through, so I'll try to move this along. First, I wanted to ask, what is, in the panel's opinion, the most effective route for small, innovative companies to have new cutting-edge technologies to get visibility and consideration within the federal government cybersecurity area? Yes.
Well, I'm from a small business in New York, and we do cybersecurity research. So I could say from experience that the Small Business Innovation Research Program is one of the best vehicles for small businesses to become involved in cybersecurity. It's an excellent program, and it requires that the small businesses not just work in cybersecurity and R&D, but also transition the technology. So I think that that is very important. One of the things that hurts small businesses and innovations is the common criteria certification that is required on security products. In order to get a new security product used in the federal government, one has to go through a very expensive common criteria certification. Entry-level price is about $250,000, and very few small businesses can afford that. So as a result, you have some of the most innovative ideas that are really never get into the federal government because of this certification requirement.
Thank you. Anybody else on that? Ms. Franz?
I'd like to touch upon two aspects. One is, I think, building upon the awareness aspect. There are several mechanisms for making small business and other users more aware of the steps they can take to protect themselves. So looking at it from that perspective, what does a small business need to do vis-a-vis what a large company or individuals need to do? And one great resource for that is the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which is involved in a lot of awareness efforts and a partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. Those kinds of efforts certainly could be bolstered to have more of a marketing campaign-like effect that Dr. D'Amico alluded to earlier, and I think would be positive. With regard to how they can take advantage of cybersecurity efforts in the government, I just think it's a great awareness need, outreach need, a look at how procurement efforts can be undertaken to take those into consideration, make it easier for them to participate.
Great. Thank you. In the Defense Reauthorization Bill, Section 254, entitled Trusted Defense Systems, it calls for an assessment of various methods of verifying the trust of semiconductors procured by the Department of Defense from commercial sources for use on mission-critical components of potentially vulnerable defense systems. How can the federal government better prepare and provide for these critical needs in a more comprehensive manner and a more timely schedule to meet those critical semiconductor requirements today? Yes.
So I think you're alluding to what's known as the supply chain problem.
Yes.
Wherein we are now purchasing semiconductors, boards, and software from abroad, either through U.S. companies or not, and using them in defense systems. And we're using them also in private sector systems, which are used in defense and which are controlling critical infrastructures that are not used in defense. big problem, and it does not have a short-term solution. It is a very difficult problem involving probably 5 to 10 years worth of research before we will have some basic engineering approaches to solve it. And we should appreciate the severity of the threat and hope that the sophistication of our attackers is not at the level it could be.
Anyone else on that? Ms. Franz?
I'd just like to highlight the notion that suppliers, whether they be U.S. companies or otherwise, are very aware of the vulnerabilities they have if something goes wrong. So they have taken steps in a number of ways to address their supply chain cycles and efforts in order to shore that up along the way. Of course, there are always situations in which that doesn't happen. Those measures aren't undertaken, and not only the company but others could possibly see the ramifications of that. But before we do anything that disrupts the economic model that many companies and government are benefiting from, we need to have a discussion about how best to construct that in a positive way. So again, that partnership is really important to figure out exactly what's happening, what is industry doing, perhaps what it isn't, and what the parts that need to be addressed before we disrupt the system that, and thereby restrict the kinds of innovations that government can get in a timely manner. Certainly the spectrum of sensitivity or classification or criticality of a mission needs to be taken into consideration as well. Where do they need the most critical, the most secure solutions, and where might they be able to leverage a global marketplace better? So that discussion and consultation is necessary for that.
Let me just wrap up with the last question. There was a recent article in the New York Times entitled "Contractors Vie for Plum Work, Hacking for the U.S." That focused in part on the growing demand for cyber warriors. How can the government and our educational system ensure that we meet the demands for these, not only meet the demand, but also win the cybersecurity race and stay ahead of the curve here?
I recall that article, and there are a few things about it. One is that they mentioned that there are very few people who have the security clearances that are needed to engage in some of that work. We need to have more U.S. citizens who get advanced degrees in computer science, engineering, and the interdisciplinary areas that are related to computer security. The second thing is that a lot of those people came out of the military. One of the reasons they came out of the military is because of something that I alluded to before, that if you are a techie in the military, you don't get an advancement. We really need to have in the military a way of rewarding those people who are cyber defenders, cyber warriors, and then you'll grow them in the military, and then when they retire, they'll be there to help in those areas that were mentioned in the New York Times article.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, so education is definitely important. Educating people, a lot of our workforce is coming out of universities with education on secure coding capabilities, but not really secure systems. Understanding how to design systems in a secure fashion is actually a lot more difficult than understanding how to code securely. A lot of the threats that we see are really more systems threats. You're using fine software throughout your system, but it's got a weak password rule, or those types of things are in place. So making sure that we have people that understand those and are coming up through the ranks of our universities that understand how to design secure systems. Now, we do have, we have been producing more of those professionals in the last few years, but it's still just a growing field, so we need to do more. It's also important that we institute strong internship programs, strong programs that link them with industry, link them with government, because the university environment only gives so much focus to the real world, essentially. So a lot of our work with universities today, we fund university research, but when we see the researchers come in, a lot of those researchers, we're teaching them about the real world and trying to give them enough knowledge to have impact in other places.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carnahan. And I know Mr. Nagelbauer had a follow-up question, so Chair recognizes Mr. Nagelbauer.
Well, thank you. I was just going to go back to our conversation that Dr. Goodman was talking about in the cell phone area, and we talked about the devices necessarily may not be equipped to process some of the threats. But I guess the question is, what is the industry doing, I guess, out there to make sure that that their systems have integrity? Because obviously a lot of people, it's big business, and so other panel members, if you have some knowledge on that, I think it'd be helpful for us as well.
Well, I'll let Fred also respond, but from where I sit, I don't see, and it is big business. I mean, it's big business worldwide, not just the providers of the service, but the makers of the devices and so on and so forth. So far, I don't see much. I would also like to say something hopefully encouraging in that we are at the beginning of what I perceive to be a very rapidly rising curve in this domain. We have a certain amount of history with mistakes and not getting ahead of the game with regard to the Internet and all sorts of other security areas. Right now, most of the users of cell phone, most of that 3.5, probably 4 billion people in the world now, are using fairly weak devices that limit the kind of risk they are taking. That is going to be changing rapidly. Can we all of us, industry, government, governments around the world, actually for once get ahead of the curve on this and do something to mitigate these risks before it becomes the kind of tsunami that I'm afraid it's going to become?
Mr. Brown? Did you, I thought you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So when we look at, I agree. In some cases, we are at an infancy in the cell phone PDA world, right? We have opportunity to do a lot better in this world than we have in the laptop, desktop world. The threats are going to be different here, though, as we open up new interfaces and new capabilities to these phones. So, Apple first put out their iPhone and they said a browser will be your only interface. That was easy to secure. But guess what? Consumers demanded that I have an app for everything, as the Apple commercial says. And each one of those applications now has increasing functionality. Each one of those applications has potential vulnerabilities. They've done a better job at securing things, but there are more vulnerabilities, more opportunities to either socially engineer threats, which is actually probably more of a threat than software engineering of a threat. So we are at the point where we can do more and not have the same problems that we had sort of in the desktop, laptop world.
Dr. Schneider?
Let me point out a few technical differences between the cell phone world and the desktop world and the way they're evolving that might give you some reason to sleep at night. First, there is no dominant producer of the operating system for cell phones. There are a fair number of producers. That means there's not a monoculture, so it's difficult for a single attack to attack all the processors. Second, early in the evolution of cell phones, the phone companies established the model that they owned the software and that they would periodically change your software without telling you when they decided to make a change in feature or fix a bug. So the model that we have for desktop software, where Microsoft announces a bunch of patches for some vulnerabilities, notice they didn't announce that they were successfully attacked. They were preempting that. But the model where it's the user's responsibility to configure the system and it's the user's responsibility to keep it up to date has been abandoned. And at least for the basic operating system of the cell phone, this is under control of the manufacturer. there's a possibility now that everyone's going to be able to download their own applications, and they will be responsible for that piece of the picture. That will be a problem. But if the cell phone manufacturers retain the view that they manage your security, then we might be better off.
Thank you. And we keep pushing back. I'm looking at the TV screen here to see about when we're going to vote. I want to ask, I don't want to get into, we don't have much time, so I just want to very briefly get into, throw out one more question. I was looking through my notes that I had made. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes, but hopefully we can keep that to shorter than that. Dr. D'Amico talked about needing to incentivize technology transfer, and Dr. Schneider also talked about needing to bridge the gap between the research and policy. How do we do this? And this is always an issue that is faced in so many different areas in technology transfer, and something I'm very interested in because I think it's very critical, getting that research, especially from our universities, and getting them together with industry. How do we do that in this instance? So, Dr. D'Amico, do you?
We really need to make the government program managers who are monitoring this federally funded research accountable for the technology transition and make the researchers incentivized to do it. First of all, the programs that are funded should include a technology transition phase and not stop at, well, you've built a prototype, you've demonstrated it in a laboratory, and now we're done and we write the paper. It really has to go through usability testing and operational environment. And the money has to be there to do it. The second thing, and this is something I raised in my oral testimony, is that I think that the researchers need to go out to the security professionals who are ultimately going to be using the results of their work. So much of research is really, so many researchers brief themselves or their community. They publish papers within their community, and they never really go out and talk to the security practitioners. And we need to have the results of the research brought out to those security practitioners. Write an article for information security. See if you can turn your research into something that makes sense to the practitioners. And it may change the way you do your research. So those are two of the ideas that I have.
Thank you. Dr. Schneider?
Let me comment on two things. First, so I am one of those researchers, and I do get government grants. I run a fairly big operation. Today, if you want to get a grant, you're much better off being able to assert in the grant application what your successful technology transitions were than to list publications. At least in many of the funding agencies, there is a culture that people who succeed in having a real impact are the ones that you want to fund. And publications don't matter for so much. The other question has to do with teaching policy and technology. I think academia may be a bit ahead of the curve here, but when I read places asserting we need to teach all our students the list of common security holes and secure coding practices, and the next step is to teach them how to do secure designs, I think we need to teach them ethics. I think we need to teach them law, because if they don't understand these things, they're not going to know when they can trade off between a technological solution and a policy solution. If they don't have a good sense of ethics and sociology, then they won't understand how when they change the internet so it's more secure, the fact that it became less usable makes it a less attractive place for all of its users, and it gets ruined in another way. And so I think it's the responsibility of universities and any educator to have a much broader view than this kind of technology. And we shouldn't get railroaded into believing that we should produce technologists to solve this problem, because they'll come up with solutions, but they're not going to be good solutions in the big picture.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, just one quick comment. When you talk about moving from research into products and applications, we have to understand that some of that takes a long time. You know, even if I come up with the greatest idea today within my company, within my position, I'm a year and a half out before that idea gets into a product. Because we're mid-cycle on products, we're going to take that time. So patience and diligence and follow-through is critical to get anything done. So we have great ideas, we have great research. They take time to get implemented in products, and they take time for people to implement them in the commercial sector or in the government sector. So we need to have processes in place that are going to track that research that we're doing through its life cycle and not give up on it after a year or 2 years.
Thank you. That'd be very brief. Dr. Goodman.
Very brief, I guess. There's another side to this. The implication in a lot of what has just been said is that somehow the innovators, the people who do the research, need to push what they have done into the real world. Okay? And perhaps by offering things, get policy changed or what have you. There's the other side of things, and that is the people who are going to be the primary consumers of better security, whether they're trying to manifest this through policy or through what they think will really help their products, their commercial activities be more secure. They've got to send serious signals that there is a demand for certain kinds of research to solve certain kinds of problems. And that demand, I think, will filter into the research community, when with funding they will get results. It's a two-way street to get things from ideas into useful practice.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for testimony today. I certainly have learned a tremendous amount, and as we move forward right now, we have, as I said, 2 more hearings on cybersecurity. As we move forward with our with legislation in this area, we're certainly going to take a lot of what you have said and any more follow-up that you may have for us, we would appreciate. The record is going to remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. So again, thank the witnesses for their testimony, thank the members for their participation, and the witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned.